Alright. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, this one is obviously hentai. I guess kind of showable in the back. I don't think I have that one. Okay, it seems there was something else that was maybe a little raunchy, but oh well. So, first up, we've got Kingdom Season 3 Part 2. Clonk. Regions A and B. That looks like an English dub. Continuing. A bold tragedy can define history. If I remember correctly, this one has been a pretty straightforward, standardish sort of release. Didn't want to say mediocre, because it's not quite what I mean, but it's like, it as an A, and it as cover art is been right about there in the middle. Don't know much about the series. Some of this stuff looks cool. Here we have Fate, Kaleid liner, Prisma, Illya, Licht, Nameless girl. I guess sorry, I was lost in thought. I haven't seen anything of this series in a while. Save a friend or save humanity. Definitely. Oh, this is a movie. Okay. Region A only. Japanese with English subtitles. The singular disc. Nameless girl. Here's one I watched pretty recently. Zombieland Saga Revenge. This was season 2 of Zombieland Saga. And I'm not sure if I can compare it directly to the first one, but it was pretty entertaining. I guess the first season definitely has it starts off really well. Good start to a series. I think it's something that kind of makes you amused and catches your attention and does a pretty good job of kind of continuing on from that. And I mentioned before that it's also kind of relevant because it's an idol anime, and I'm not a big fan of those per se. They just don't always draw me in or keep me or something. Zombieland Saga was pretty good. Regions A and B, English dub. If you're dead, the show must go on. Ooh. That's not just a card, that's a sparkly card. Okay, not all of the characters. I feel it's only the 3 cards. Interesting. Pretty cards. Disc 1, Disc 2. Characters. And let's see, as I put this away, this next one may surprise you because normally I open my One Piece in advance, or I unpackage some of the anime to get to the One Piece, but we didn't prioritize watching this mostly because we already had a plan in place and I didn't want to reschedule that yet again. It was just some Magic the Gathering stuff. We played 4 games, nothing too serious or intense, but 3 of them were involving similar decks, which can be kind of hard on the conscience, I guess. But as you can see, it's still DVD, Blu-ray, 2 discs. We'll probably watch this coming Friday, so I might have much to talk, or some stuff to talk about there. Here's this week's anime DVD collection update. Okay, there's a big list of stuff to talk about. I guess I ended up doing a lot of anime watching. I'm not quite sure how though. Didn't feel like I really had the time. But okay, I guess to begin with, I did I mentioned last week that I was considering probably signing up for High Dive, and I did. And I'd say it as a streaming service is a little on the weaker side. Not that others aren't without their flaws, but to me, High Dive almost feels like it's there for you to consume the content and not necessarily stream it. And I know that sounds kind of weird, and I guess some of the examples are, you have the ability to favorite shows, and then they show up under your favorites, but while you may think, okay, is that like Crunchyroll's watch list? Well, not quite as far as I can tell, insofar as you still have to go to the main page and scroll down to your favorites to get there. So there isn't a separate section for favorites or for your watch history, so I had to kind of keep track of that stuff on my own as far as I could tell. That's what I needed to do. And I think some of the data is there. It seems to know that there's certain things it wants me to go back to. There's certain episodes it knows I've watched, but it doesn't really give me a watch history. And so it's a little weird because it just kind of feels like there's this blob of stuff thrown at you, and there's perfectly great stuff out there to watch. It's just interesting that it is definitely a consume the product sort of service. And let's see, what was the other thing that was interesting about it? Like, the player works, but you can kind of tell it's not like the most developed streaming player out there. I'm pretty sure it's by far not the weakest out there. You can probably find really weak ones on pirated sites. In fact, spoiler alert, that's kind of how I keep up on Rick and Morty. But for High Dive, you know, the features feel there, I suppose. There's some stuff there that might be interesting to play with, but the thing that really stood out to me the most is that, at least on the browser I'm using, it looks like I'm using Edge on the TV computer. I can't pause it by pressing spacebar, if I have it full screen at least, unless I think I've got my mouse already hovered over the thing. So it's weird because when it's paused, even if I don't have my mouse down there, if I press spacebar, it plays again. So pausing in the middle of shows has been a little strange, but it's interesting. I just, for some reason, because I've done High Dive for the first time, I was like, hey, you know, I should mention all this stuff, especially if you're used to Crunchyroll and maybe you're curious about High Dive. I wouldn't say that it, as an anime viewing experience, is superior. I would say it feels a little less than that, but on the other side of that, it feels it's the kind of thing where if you like a lot of the content that's going to be on there, I think it could be worthwhile. If you're curious how that compares to Netflix, with Netflix it kind of feels like they keep you really constrained into whatever interface they're going to serve to you, if you understand what I mean. So it kind of feels like, I don't feel like the episodes, the different, I don't know, it doesn't feel like Netflix would encompass all of the different aspects there would be of, oh, we're going to be hosting a lot of anime. Now, they do have a good amount of anime on there, but again, you know, it sort of just feels like you get tossed in the basket and forgotten about, sort of. It's weird. And, you know, like every streaming service just kind of has its weird absurdities. If I'm saying all this, let's also talk about one of the big problems with Crunchyroll is you can watch stuff on there and you can get the feeling that they definitely added things as if they were going to be dub and sub, but then they went super dub, so they have multiple versions of different dubs, and the system seems way more confused by that than it really feels like it ought to be. Like, it should say French dub shouldn't immediately start German dub, shouldn't immediately start English dub, shouldn't immediately start Portuguese dub. You know, if anything, you should be willing to go from dub to sub only, and it doesn't seem like it's wanting to do that, but it does feel weird, and you can tell they're kind of doing some weird jungling underneath the covers to make some of that stuff work by giving really weird season numberings for stuff sometimes, it feels like. Really strange, but, you know, it's interesting because this past week was kind of an exploration in those kind of concepts. Now, that said, I haven't watched a whole lot of Netflix anime. Because when I was watching Uncle from Another World, came to a pausing point, and I haven't looked to see when it's supposed to resume. I probably should, because I'm still curious about that one. But the stuff I did watch is going to be Crunchyroll and High Dive. And, you know, I'm cheating by looking at my notes over here. So, to begin with all that stuff, we have Classroom of the Elite, Season 2, Episode 12, which I do believe was the final episode of the season. And it feels like it led up to a really good point. Something that's our character that we've kind of suspected and were wanting to see, but it's a notable side of him. I just don't know what I want to say too much, so much as, you know, if you really like Classroom of the Elite, and you like the idea that our main character definitely seemed like he was something else. Like, I know, it sort of began, I remember a long time ago, it sort of began, oh yeah, we kind of got this guy and this girl who kind of are in the back, and they feel like they're much smarter for the class than they really ought to be. But he feels like he is a sort of genius mastermind deliberately not standing out, and for lack of better words, she just feels like she's kind of a cunt. Like, she looks down on people, and, you know, it's weird because sometimes there's partnerings like this that are supposed to look like they're mirroring each other, but, you know, they do a really bad job. It's really quite unfortunate because, well, because of that thought too, but, you know, it's sort of like, I think we like seeing girls that are like that, but for some reason, people have this tendency to deliberately overdo things in ways that make them seem the opposite of that. I mean, we get that problem with live-action girl power movies, which make the characters look anything but powerful because they look kind of petty and snobbish, and it's just like, you know, our favorite characters look like they're above people, not like they're trying to let other people know that they're above them. They just are simply above people, and so when you can execute that correctly, that's pretty great. If you're trying to make somebody that's got villainous tendencies, you know. But I digress. Classroom of the Elite didn't lean on that as a concept, fortunately. I can think of other anime that have leaned a little bit on that, but didn't realize they were kind of failing, because, like, okay, he's saying something that's really critical but has a hint of truth. She's just outright lying and being a bitch. And I don't know why the writers have to be so... I mean, maybe they're not trying to be so lopsided. Maybe that's the entire point, is they're trying to mix those exact personalities. But, it's still one of those things where it's just like, it'd be cool if they had an actual foil or a friend or something, mirror or something. Parallel World Pharmacy, Episode 12. I do believe... yeah, I think that one kind of set itself up as an end of season sort of thing. I'm trying to think if it ended in a way where I would expect anything. No, it kind of ended where I guess I'd expect it to from where it went. I wouldn't say that it was as promising as it was at the very, very beginning. There's some things that are about it that are kind of nice, feel good, in a similar way to how, you know, with One Piece there, how sometimes it's really nice when the Straw Hat Pirates are just kind of thrown into this group and they're split up, and, you know, they kind of pass on their superior skills to other people who can learn from them. You know, Sanji teaches somebody some cooking ideas. Morono Zoro helps somebody kind of learn to pick up swordsmanship. Luffy gives somebody kind of motivational thing. You know, all those things that the Straw Hat Pirates are good at and get passed on to other people. Those are kind of good, feel good. And Parallel World Pharmacy is kind of that as a series. Like I said, there's some issues with it, but these aren't problems that are limited only to it. Sometimes people kind of have trouble telling, I guess, where their understanding versus their fanhood sort of ends. I watched started watching a couple of YouTube videos that were kind of like this. I think maybe from the same author. And one of them was kind of talking about how, well, he was beating around the bush to get to this point where he was going to talk about how robots can't feel emotions. And at that point, I'm just like,
yeah, there is a big problem with AI, but the problem is you're kind of falling into it yourself by saying that, because the truth of the matter, and I said this last week, because Vivi, I've watched episodes 6 and 7, it still feels like that there's that problem there where it doesn't exactly understand, from a narrative perspective, what you need to do to really identify, oh yes, this is AI, because for the most part, when it talks about AIs, it still feels like it's setting up people, and yet it's setting up these artificial limitations on people as if, oh yes, they're just AI. They will have artificial limitations, and not how would an actual artificial intelligence act if it was given this sort of stuff? It still wants you to think, okay, they're clearly experiencing an emotion here, but that emotion is one of a human that was designed a specific way, and not an AI that was only designed for a single specific task, and so in theory wouldn't need the I guess to kind of help explain the issue I have going on there, let's take an emotion like anger, and if you think about somebody that's like, oh my god, I'm gonna beat them up, well, if you take a step back and you ask, okay, why does that happen? Why are our bodies able to do that sort of thing? Because this entire idea that emotions are just some magical thing that comes out of nowhere and comes into us is kind of faulty. And so you can say, well, okay, maybe it's something that comes in because of, you know, it's advantageous in nature. But you ask yourself, why is it advantageous in nature? And the answer for anger is usually it's a motivator to get you to take action when maybe you would either be afraid or disinclined to do so. So you could think of like a primitive human tribe that's, you know, they've suffered from the loss of a loved one, and then that sadness turns to anger because maybe it was killed by some sort of wild beast or something, and now they're like, we're gonna kill that beast. And then humans as a tribe manage to live because they're extra motivated to do something about that thing that is dangerous to humans, and so humans kind of get a leg up over other creatures. And every creature kind of has this to a certain extent. I mean, like deer, you know, they're a classic prey species, but they can get pretty angry and try to attack you, you know. They're motivated to do something that maybe they wouldn't normally try to do because it's dangerous, but by being motivated to take action, they could save their doe from a predator that discovered it, and they need to chase the predator away or something like that. So, okay, maybe an AI could have anger as a motivator, because if you take it outside of that survival concept, it even exists when it's like something like if you're in a group of people and you're not getting as much share of the rewards as other people. Maybe, even if it's not tribal, you could be like, oh, yeah, everybody, we're going out for pizza, but everybody deliberately fucks you over so you don't get any slices at all. You know, there's anger there, and that anger as motivation can motivate you to confront your friends who maybe you wouldn't normally confront about this, or maybe you question whether or not this is a peer group you want to hang out with. You know, the anger is still there as a valid thing. And there's certain levels of it that may not exist, but you would be able to at least say, okay, anger as emotion could exist. Now, you could also say that, you know, because we exist from that same group of genes that were people that were out in the wild, you know, we have a wider range of anger expressibility. And if you're going to have an AI and you want the AI to have emotions, it would make sense for anger to actually be an emotion, at least at the level of like frustration or something like that. Like a robot that keeps getting knocked down even though it's supposed to take this box and deliver it. And so now it's trying extra hard not to get knocked down or something like that. But it doesn't ever reach a point where it's like, oh, I gotta kill that person that keeps knocking me down or anything like that. Maybe there's an artificial limitation there, but you know, if you're exploring an artificial intelligence having emotion, you come up with ideas like that, where you're like, okay, well, they've tweaked it so that it only gets frustrated because of this, or things like that. And my issue with Vivi as a series is that that limitation doesn't really exist. Just like the limitation of, oh, an AI only has one objective isn't very well defined, because normally you would say, and you can't just say, oh, AIs are just like this, period, especially for a series like this, which is supposed to take place over a long period of time, and people are going to make not only advancements, but also mistakes. They're going to try weird things, they're going to try combinations of things. So a hard, fast rule like that doesn't make sense. It feels very artificially constructed. And my point is, you know, like that YouTube video began by saying that, and the point is, no. Any artificial intelligence we make, even if it's a weak AI as they called it, it's going to have some level of emotion in order to provide the proper motivations for it to do things. And okay, that might come in a limited context, but maybe as we get to a stronger AI, maybe we adjust that more so that they react appropriately. Like, we would want them to feel the kind of fear that causes you to react really quickly to an unexpected situation, such as you realizing somebody's about to hit your car and you need to brace yourself. I could see us developing AIs that are suddenly very afraid, for lack of better words, and know they need to do something about that, whether it's weak or strong AI. And whatever. It's not like Vivi's an outstanding offender in this regard. It's just a pretty common way where we have this idea of artificial intelligence, but sometimes we make the human condition too special, and then we're like, okay, well, Data can't learn how to make contractions, and that's stupid. Because, well, is he a weak AI? No, he's supposed to be a strong AI. He's sentient, which means, in theory, he can learn new languages. If he can learn new languages, he can learn new words for a given language. If he can learn new words for a given language, he can learn new sentence structures for a given language. So, that aspect of Star Trek Next Generation doesn't make sense. It's a thing that, I guess it's sort of similar to how they also have Vulcans talking about logic, or logical, illogical, rational, whatever, without actually talking about real logic. Common sets of assumptions and that. Because a true logical being would actually understand humans way more than Vulcans would, just because you would understand, if you are logical, that there are certain assumptions that are in place, and you would know where your assumptions would differ from human assumptions, and you would be able to make things there where you're like, okay, well, I wouldn't have been able to come to that deduction as a Vulcan making human reasoning, because I would maybe have my own set of assumptions, but they wouldn't say highly illogical. They would understand the logic behind it, which is born from the assumptions underlying. And like I said, even something where it's like, oh, well, why did they just get angry and then have to do something there? Well, it's because that emotion is actually valuable. It's blah, blah, blah. I'm going way off the line philosophical. You could say that's a good thing about Vivi, because Vivi's problem is actually that it goes the opposite direction with the AI stuff, where it's like, okay, instead of treating humans as more special than they actually are, it treats the human condition as too obvious as the way they are. And it's definitely not the worst offender like that. You all have seen anime where X gets turned into girl, anime girl. So, like, a Kiken is about cans, soda cans being turned into girls. And ultimately, it's kind of ridiculous. I say kind of as if it isn't completely absurdly ridiculous. But we understand that stuff is funny. Sometimes that stuff is very tongue-in-cheek with the way it's doing it. But the end of the line is, just because an anime's created an android that looks like a girl doesn't mean that she's going to have girl-like emotions just per se. And yeah, it takes the AI stuff too granted, while at the same time way too limited. Without it doesn't feel consistent. But I guess you could say, again, it's a good series because it makes you think and talk about that stuff, and it's pretty otherwise. Miruko-chan, season 1, episodes 4 through 7. I guess I just kind of resumed watching that one because it was kind of easy to have on in the background, but I eventually reached a pause point because there was a lot of other interesting stuff to try to explore, and mostly because it, as a series, so like, one of the big problems I mentioned about it is there's definitely supposed to be a danger to these things that our main character can see, but it's not properly establishing what the actual danger is. There's kind of this assumption of danger based on the way other things have been explored, and it can make things feel a little unnerving, but from a storytelling perspective, it falls apart really quick, which is why I don't really understand the rating, because it's not really any better. It's definitely given some impressions of more dangerous possibilities happening, but it's not really established what bad things would actually happen, and it's kind of weak in that regard. But the other problem was that it started relying on miscommunication humor, which I'm not the biggest fan of. It's not too strong in that, but its elements of it are there, as opposed to, oh, well, maybe this is where she can communicate with someone and that person can learn, oh, they can only see the nicer spirits, not the truly malicious ones, or something like that. You know, that they shot themselves in the foot, so they can't do something like that. So it continues to be a thing where our main character is doing her own thing, other characters are doing their own thing. There's a lot of characters doing their own thing, and it doesn't feel like they're truly interacting with each other. So I, for one, definitely don't feel the rating that it's got. It was pretty high, but I don't know. Maybe other people have other thoughts. But 7 episodes is a pretty good chance to give a show. Spy Family, Season 1, Episode 14. At least that's how Crunchyroll's calling it. Holy shit. It's still great. This episode, though, kind of was very a somber reality that even though the show is very playful about its material, there's a very dark undertone to what's going on. And while, okay, yeah, that's sort of been acknowledged to a certain degree in some places, I've never felt them express it as much as this episode, to the point I had goosebumps and wanted to head pat some of the characters, because, oh my god, good episode. Great episode. Let's see, and then, yeah, because this order isn't the order of stuff I watch stuff, this is just whatever order I have stuff on here. Next up, I finally found a place where Crunchyroll is talking about new stuff that is airing and stuff, so yes, this one was Crunchyroll, duh. Beast Tamer. So there's 2 episodes of that out now. I think the second episode came out pretty recently. It's actually pretty entertaining. I think it has a problem where most of its characters are a little over-the-top assholes, where it's just like... So, like, I think it begins with the hero's party kicking our main character out of their party because he's not pulling his weight, according to them, in battle. He's just doing all their scouting for them and carrying all their supplies for them and gathering their supplies, etc. And it's very reminiscent of that other one that I watched a couple of months ago. I was kicked from the hero's party, so I retired into a country village, or whatever it was called. Something vaguely like that. So they're both the same in that they are that. Our main characters are actually badasses in both cases, for different reasons, and I would say that you could probably choose one or the other depending on what kind of show you want to watch because of that. The other one, if you want to watch a character who's kind of having a relaxing country life and not a power trip, that one's pretty good. This one isn't quite power tripping yet. Some of it is sort of surprising that things didn't come up before. And as you watch it more, I think you appreciate more what it's actually doing and why it could be entertaining. I'm definitely curious to see where it goes from here, because it's not grandiose, but it's definitely one where it's like, okay, yeah, this is kind of nice. So I'm definitely curious what episode 3 is going to be like. So yeah, I'm going to continue watching that, see what I think about it. Next up we have I'm the Villainess, So I'm Taming the Final Boss, which is interesting. So I mentioned before, I was talking about something else. Oh yes, I was talking about like with these shows that have a guy character and a girl character, and the guy's supposed to come off as kind of a source of interesting ideas, thoughts, observations, etc. And maybe the girl's a kind of mirror of that, but they ruin it and she's a bitch. I was kind of hinting there that I'm a villainess, so I'm taming the final boss. It's kind of similar to the other Resurrected as a Villainess show, in that in both of those, without going in there having any idea what they are, if I hear that a girl is being a villainess, I'm like, it'd be really interesting to see if she was a real villainess. You know, we've seen some real villains, and definitely I would like to add to the repertoire characters of the female persuasion as well. You know, I like a good villain. I think everybody likes a good villain. In fact, I'm going to be talking about that next. But in this case, so the other one I watched, 2 seasons of that, if there was any problem with it, it would be that our main character was resurrected as the villainess, but she regained her past life memories early enough such that you know, the idea of her being a villainess is just completely non-existent. She, as a person throughout that entire show, is just good, but she's overcompensating for her perceived of being a villainess to the point where she's just a really great person, and it's kind of fun because of that. This one is not taking that route, but it is kind of weird where it's sitting, where our main character woke up late enough into the Otome game story arc such that, you know, she had already done some pretty bad things, but she hadn't done some truly outrageous things. And some of that is kind of set up so that, you know, I think it's an important turning point for the character in that, because it kind of suggests that, you know, the show wants us to have an understanding of what turned her into the person that she was trying so hard. And the problem was she was a tryhard, and you could think of the original Otome Games character being an example of a tryhard who eventually started trying too hard and just went over the line and started doing absolutely bad things. So this character is before that point, but at an important turning point such that, you know, she's going to change her direction, and it's hard to tell whether or not she feels like she's actually a different character because of some of this stuff or not. It's a little strange in that way, and some of it is conveniently set up so that's like, okay, yeah, so now she's riding with the guy in this cart that's in a very magical way. It's it feels very thrown at the audience and given for free, and so maybe unearned to a degree. But to be fair, that's pretty common in this genre in general, especially since you know, so this one is definitely a reverse harem show, but it feels like it's really easy for shows that have a female protagonist to not have to work for the stuff. And maybe people are really into that, and that's just fine. But, you know, obviously, I kind of like a character that does something. I grew up on Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind, and Nausicaa's one of my personal childhood heroes. She's always trying her best. I should think about her more and try to get inspiration from her more. She's great. But she works for her stuff. She busts her fucking ass. And so, you know, this one doesn't line up with that, but I do enjoy kind of what it's setting up, where she is still doing her own thing. So it's similar to the other story where the character is stuck in an Otome game, and in that one he uses a lot of his knowledge and experience and stuff to kind of just prove himself, so to speak. And while she's not proving herself, she is definitely not being led around like a clueless heroine, which is really good. She's got her specific goals, and she's got directions and instructions for other people that have things going forward. So, you know, I complain about these standards of the standard tropes of the genre, and it's not that big of a deal, I think. The 3 episodes I watched were pretty entertaining. I think if I had only seen 2 episodes, I would have still been wavering, and I would have wanted to see episode 3. But, you know, episode 3, I think I'm enjoying kind of where it's going. Maybe not as much as Stuck in an Otome game, but then again, that one is a little bit revenge fantasy-ish. So, speaking of revenge fantasy, now we're going over to stuff I've watched on High Dive. And I know somewhere in here there's Redo of Healer, and I probably skipped watching it because I realized it was not rated very high. And High Dive, I guess, has its own rating system that says, oh, it's fine for the people who come to High Dive that watch it. And I'm like, and the premise sounds curious enough, I'm curious. And it's interesting because it's definitely a revenge anime. Our main character was abused in his previous life, but he became really powerful secretly, and then was able to defeat the Demon King or the Demon Queen, Demon Lord on his own, and use the Philosopher's Stone to turn back time so that when his power was first going to awaken, his soul would remember his mistreatment from the past life, the past iteration, and he would be able to live a life more along what he wants. And he remembers all these people, like, they were drugging him and raping him and beating him and just horrible stuff. And now he's kind of fucking angry at them, and he remembers his tricks to becoming overpowered. The things that let him get away with stuff theirs. And he's got a head start on that stuff here. And as a revenge fantasy, it actually works out pretty well, because not only does it establish that, but it establishes that these aren't just like, oh yeah, well, maybe this iteration those things won't happen, because usually he lets these people dig themselves a 6-foot deep grave. Well, I say grave, but he's been very iffy about killing people per se, which is one of the weird things. So, you know, obviously I mentioned the big rape word, and this is a show that's definitely for a mature audience. It tells you it's rated MA. This could be part of the reason why High Dive wasn't saying, oh, you got more episodes to watch here. Maybe it doesn't remember those as well. Maybe it's trying to do people a favor. But the truth of the matter is, I'm just kind of curious about it from a storytelling perspective, because a lot of that stuff is either a lot of the mature stuff. Some of it's actually kind of interesting because it's done from a different perspective. So, like, he doesn't get into the pants of every single girl. There's some that are just sort of like unsure. The way they engage with him differs from person to person. It feels like a lot of it is very excusey, which, you know, definitely makes it feel a little porno-ish, but it doesn't actually show anything. It doesn't even give you most of the sounds. So for the most part, you're just kind of rolling your eyes and saying, okay, yeah, now why would he rape that character? Because I know if I hated that character that much, I wouldn't want them anywhere near me in such an intimate way. And you could say that, you know, he has some power because, you know, they wouldn't want it either. But at the same time, you know, that just means that it's an inconsistency between what I think they're doing and what they should be. What I would do, what they do, etc. And outside of that, the revenge fantasy stuff is actually fairly well executed, I would say. And he as a character is just kind of interesting. The stuff they introduce is interesting. Some of it isn't very well explained, I would say. But at the end of the day, it's just sort of like, well, okay, they're not weighing on it too much. They didn't explain it too well, but they're moving on, assuming that you just take it for granted. And so if you can take it for granted, then you can move on and enjoy what it actually does. If there's anything, I would say that what happened, the resolution of the ends of stuff in Season 1 felt a little too quick and straightforward to a degree. It didn't feel very finale-ish. Maybe it's not supposed to, maybe there's supposed to be more seasons. But overall, it's a strange show, but it's very interesting that it exists. And you can evaluate based on my descriptions whether or not you would actually want to do that. Because again, it goes to some dark places, and some of those are just, I call it silly dark. Not because the material is silly, but because it's like, you can tell the show's making excuses to do that thing. Oh well. Let's see. I also watched I'm Quitting Heroing. Now, I watched only the first season. I haven't watched the 2 OVAs. Partially because, well, there was one OVA out. The second OVA may have come out today or something. So I just held off on the OVAs just yet because Season 1 told what I felt like was enough of the complete story. And that's pretty unusual. It means if there's a Season 2, I'm not quite sure what they would do, and I'm just labeling it Season 1 in my notes because there's so many Season 1s that end up becoming Season 2s that at this point I'm just not trying to think about it too much. Content-wise, it's actually pretty entertaining. You know, the basic premise is our main character is a hero that was powerful enough to defeat the Demon Queen all on his own. Then humanity decided they were scared of him and they didn't want him around anymore, and he was relieved of his heroing duties, and so he's applying for the Demon Queen's army because she's rebuilding it. Which she doesn't like, but her 4 generals do like it. And while I wouldn't say that the generals are like the most perfect people character design wise, like sometimes it's like, sometimes the flaws you introduce in characters are a little on the silly side. It's nothing too bad. And the truth of the matter is, I think the show really shines when it actually opens up its story a bit more and you kind of understand the context of things a bit more. It surprised me, and it actually did good stuff with what it kind of started unwinding. Now, the downside is you wouldn't get a good feel of that from the first 3 episodes. So this is a show that I would say fails the 3-episode test, because you may actually really enjoy the show, but you won't know if you'll enjoy those elements until you're actually halfway through or so. So, funny things to think about. Like I said, watched a lot of stuff this week. Reincarnated as a Sword. Only 1 episode. It's an okay episode. The main problem with it is just that it introduces our main characters, which is the Sword and the Cat Girl. And that's not a problem. But the main issue is it's really hard to tell from the first episode if I'm going to enjoy watching this anime on an episode-by-episode basis. It basically introduces the characters too much. So I think somebody mentioned that, okay, yeah, there's a Reincarnated, or there's, so I'm a spider, so what sort of vibe to it? Yeah, sure, okay, yeah. And he's getting more powerful as a sword, doing stuff independently of any of this stuff. And I think that's okay for setting up his character. It's not going to do the same exact thing as So I'm a Spider, So What? Because it's trying to help you understand, I guess, kind of around where he would be in terms of usefulness to this cat girl. And the cat girl, you don't get a whole lot, but you know, you just get enough to kind of understand the general vibe of things. And it's a good setup for a first episode, but again, you know, this is definitely the sort of show which will take more than that. It's not the sort of thing that makes you go, oh crap, I've got to watch the rest of this. You're like, okay, show, you've got my attention. Now, you've got 2 more episodes to tell me what you're going to do with it. That was my feeling anyways. So I'm looking forward to more episodes. I think the next one comes out on Wednesday, so not too much longer. I also watched the first episode of Management of a Novice Alchemist. I would say that the very beginning of the episode began kind of great, but I could kind of feel it slipping down into... It's on the verge of cute girls doing cute things territory, but it's not that solely. So it's unfortunate, because when our main character started, it was like, oh wow, yeah, if she's going to be focused down in the books and stuff, then it's interesting if she as a character is kind of this solo bad fucking ass character. It kind of felt like it was setting her up as that, but then it became obvious that she was kind of opening up and acting cutesy in certain ways that is, you know, the cute girls doing cute things genre. And had some other little interesting twists in the first episode, but for the most part, it's there. It's a curiosity. I'm curious to see where it's going to go, but I wouldn't say it was as good of a grabby first episode as Reincarnated as Sword, but that could again be my own preferences. And then the last thing on my list is I've somehow gotten stronger when I improved my farm-related skills. The first 2 episodes. And I might continue watching that, I might not. I'll play that one by ear. It's got some things in it that are kind of introduced right, but it feels like it doesn't really understand what to do with its stuff. I think that's a really good example. Our main character knows that they finally maxed out their farming skills and all their farming related skills, because characters do have an inventory little thing that pops up, and then they're able to, you know, he was able to do a class combination, and I guess all that stuff came together to him actually being a super overpowered human being. And the problems with that are, first of all, this ability to see your stats thing, it's established that other people can see it, other people presumably have it, can see other people's stuff, but it's not integrated completely into the world like it really should be. Like, other shows do the same sort of thing, but they do it better. I think 2 examples that come to mind. So there was one that I watched very recently, who I'm blanking on right now. Oh, yeah, the Harem in the Labyrinth of Another World. Where, okay, yeah, people can see your card because the ability to see cards kind of implies it. Now, in order to make it so that our main character's offness doesn't just get leaked and become this boring, everybody's worshiping him 24/7 wherever he goes and everything becomes stale. You know, usually these overpowered characters stay secretly overpowered, and like Harriman Labyrinth of Another World established this is happening because he was able to, because the cards only show like your first skill. So if they could see that, oh my god, he has 10 skills, how the hell does somebody get 10 skills? Then, you know, and I think it wasn't skills, it was probably class or something like that, and his first class wasn't that impressive, but his next class was super impressive, and so, you know, you can't see the super impressive one. That's kind of what it does, where it's like, okay, in a universe where people can see that stuff, you would have things set up so people would expect to see those in certain circumstances, and here's why our main character doesn't reveal he's secretly a badass because of that. And that actually works about that show. Another one was, Death Parade March Rhapsody, was it? The one where the main character thinks he's in a dream, but it's a younger self, and he accidentally uses a comet that destroys a bunch of stuff in an area, and he becomes super overleveled and just overpowered. Well, at one point in that show, they're reprinting his identity card, which would have his name and his level on it, but it's from his stats when he first started, logged in, whatever. So it doesn't include his login. So, you know, it establishes this stuff is to a degree visible, but at the same time, a good reason why it's not immediately obvious to everybody there why he's the most awesome badass to ever live in their world. And farm-related skills feels like it's failing on that level. Likewise, it feels like the main character feels more like he's an actor who's playing, trying to be a farmer, or obsessed with continuing to be a farmer. But it doesn't completely feel like, okay, this guy's just a farmer through and through. So, like, he did some attacks with host stuff, but I don't know. It would feel like if he was engaging with people more as a farmer and less as a, I'm a standard anime protagonist, it would sell it a bit more. But overall, it just means that it's a slightly weaker show. The characters are kind of interesting and curious. I definitely want to see what it's going to do with them. But at the same time, I guess the expectations are... What are the expectations? It's kind of weird because I watched, even though the ordering is different, I did watch Beast Tamer more recently, as in like yesterday. Whereas I watched this one a couple days ago. So they feel kind of the same, but Beast Tamer feels like it's doing what it needs to do better than what farm-related skills is doing. Even though they both kind of have neat characters in them. Again, Beast Tamer kind of has assholes, a problem designing a couple of assholes, but whatever. It's a bunch of interesting stuff. Okay, I've been chatting about the anime that I've watched over the past week a whole lot. I'd say that's the end, but I did also want to very briefly talk about a couple of Halloween-related movies I watched. That would be Winchester and the Blair Witch Project. So, for me, when it comes to a horror movie, I thought the Blair Witch Project was actually much more effective. But I can actually see why somebody would be more scared of and find Winchester to be a more effective movie. In the case of Winchester, so if you're not familiar with the Winchester Mansion, the basic idea is Winchester rifles, a very famous brand of rifles that revolutionized rifles, I think, when they came out. And they were mass-produced and all that stuff. Well, the husband ran the company, but he died and left his estate to his wife. And his wife became paranoid that the people killed by Winchester rifles, their ghosts were going to come and get her. So she eventually started just adding on to her house, making it harder and harder for the ghost to find her in the house, presumably. My own understanding may be a little bit off, but the idea is ghosts of people killed by Winchester rifles were going to be coming to her, and she was building hundreds and hundreds. I say hundreds and hundreds. It's more like... I think it's an over 100 room mansion, but it's not over 200. So hundreds and hundreds isn't quite right. But the point is, it's way bigger and more complicated, and the design is a little more bonkers than it really has any right to be. And it's a fascinating concept. There's an episode, not an episode, there's a story arc in Ghost Hunt that is inspired by that. And I really like that story arc. I should probably rewatch it just for Halloween. Just because it kind of has the right build-up and spooky, and it's one of the more unnerving anime episodes or story arcs out there. But I digress. But I didn't find the movie to necessarily move me too much. The main problem was that while it did have spooky scenes, it was a little too on the nose with them in a way that it just narratively didn't feel like it made sense. Like, are we supposed to feel like there's a sense of danger? I don't know. There kind of does, but it feels like it's a one-time thing. Good spooky moments, but overall, it just I guess felt artificial to me in a lot of ways. And what can you do about that? Sometimes when you overanalyze something, and sometimes, for me, it's like, oh, that's a spooky scene, but that's the third time in the last 15 minutes he's seen a spooky person that's actually a ghost show up in his view. And to me, it kind of doesn't properly build up a feeling of dread, even though there is a crescendo to it. Some elements of that crescendo kind of make me question. I felt like almost the show was looking for excuses to build scenes as opposed to having a narrative that was supposed to build up to something. And, you know, again, it's a horror movie, so sometimes they do want to just find excuses to have spooky scenes happen to you. And if you're into that kind of horror movie, Winchester may be fine. On the other hand, you may also watch it and find that I'm full of shit in terms of feeling like the narrative felt a little cobbled together in a way that didn't necessarily make sense. You know, I mean, I can describe what happened, I just can't describe why I think we would want to have a story told that way about what had happened. If you understand what I mean. So, you know, there's definitely a huge element of subjectivity to that. So, Blair Witch Project, okay, yes, I can agree with my friend that the three main characters in that one, I would say the three only characters, but I guess they interviewed some people. So the three main characters on that, they're a bit of stuck-up annoying asshole kids. Nothing that's too egregious. The sort of thing that you would probably find out, oh, yeah, you know, if this friend in my friend group ever did lead us on a thing, they would totally let their ego take over them, and we'd end up lost because of them and all this other stupid stuff. And then we'd be yelling at each other. So, you know, they didn't feel completely unrealistic in that regard. I say completely because there's maybe a slight twinge in there, but it's not too bad. And what makes the movie kind of good is you do kind of get this building feeling of dread. And while it's not the strongest I've seen in a lot of movies, it's kind of there and just kind of nice. So, you know, I enjoyed it more than Winchester. It wouldn't be my favorite horror movie by any stretch of the imagination, but I gotta give it kudos. It did a good job of just kind of having the right build-up for especially what it did. You know, it's a pretty respectable movie. Not to say that Winchester isn't respectable, but it didn't synchronize with me in a way that screams immediately respectable. Okay. That's a fucking shit ton of stuff. I'm thinking about video games. I'm not going to be talking about anything other than the really interesting fact that apparently I've never played Animal Crossing during October because I've never seen candy for sale before. So I've been making sure to visit every day and buy candy so that all three of my islands can do their trick-or-treating on Halloween. Maybe they call it Spooky Night in that one or something like that. Should all be good. But alright, outside of that, I think that finally wraps up this video. Y'all, have a nice week.